You're listening to Halfway There, Stories from the Path with God. My name is Eric Nevins. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very grateful that you have. If you haven't yet already, go over to my website, ericnevins.com, and check out the show notes for this episode and every episode of Halfway There that is out there. You'll find it there. You can always click on that subscribe button and follow us on iTunes. That way you won't miss an episode. And if you leave us a rating, it really helps out a ton. Well, my guest today is a woman whose story I heard in church. And I don't know about you, but I love it when we get a chance to share stories about what God has done in church. And I think I've said in another episode that I think that's what Scripture's all about. You know, there's so many stories. Think about all the stories that you love in the Bible of people who trusted God and then God came through. And it really is nothing more than a record of their interaction with the Lord. And that's meant to inspire faith. It's meant to inspire you to trust the Lord also. Well, that's why I share these stories. And today's story is no exception. My guest, she really learned to trust God. If you listen carefully, what you'll hear is she's been learning to surrender her life to the Lord ever since she first met Jesus. That idea of surrender just keeps coming up over and over in various ways in all the different stories that she'll share with us today. And it's beautiful when you hear her heart for the Lord and for the way that the Lord has really captured her to the point that she says she really only has one role. I think it's going to really encourage you and challenge you to think about him and maybe your relationship with him just a little bit differently. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Sue Muckley. All right, Sue, thanks for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it. It's early on a Saturday morning. We're at the coffee shop, so there's conversations going on out here, but we're going to have a great one. I'm excited about that.
Awesome.
Why don't you just start by telling me kind of like who you are, what you do kind of now, and then we'll go back and we'll kind of dig into your story.
Okay. Well, I'm Sue Muckley, and I lived here in Denver almost 16 years, and pretty significant. We moved here right after Columbine, so that was having teenage boys. I thought, well, this is probably going to be the safest place to live because they're going to put things in place for my kids to be safe when they go to school. But so that's kind of significant to me as far as our timing when moving here to Denver. And I'm a mom, but I'm also a grandma now, and two boys that are both have families of their own. One has two little girls, and the other one has a girl and one on the way. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So that's kind of where my time is spent, kind of being a grandma, but also mentoring young adults.
Oh, awesome. Very good. Did you do that in connection with the seminary or just around?
Just here. So last year we had young adults at our house every week, and so a few of those I still mentor, and then it's kind of just sharing life together, and they connect dots. And
you guys are involved in the summit.
Yes.
That dawned on me after I asked.
Yeah. So the summit was last year, and this year is I've kind of gotten back in the summit on Wednesday nights, but the other is just on Monday nights. We have the young marrieds.
Okay.
Working with a few couples there where we just do different studies on marriage. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great ministry.
Yeah, it really is, just to see these young marriages starting out. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a crucial time.
I know. Yeah.
We're almost 18 years, and so
we're going on 32.
Looking back at that, I can go, oh yeah, that's we needed some more of those people.
I know.
So let's go back. So tell me about how you became a Christian, and I actually don't know if you. So go ahead.
When I was 13, we moved from New York to South Florida, and two doors down from us were a family of two boys and a girl, kind of around my age, my brother and sister's ages, and they had just come off the mission field 11 years. And so They had a son my age who just kept asking me to go to youth group, and which was on Sunday nights. And so youth group was kind of where you'd come together, play, have a message maybe, and then end. So it was like a 2-hour time. So I didn't know anything about youth group, and I was kind of scared to go, and he kept asking and asking. So finally I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go to shut him up, So that was around January, and then come May, we had a retreat that we were invited to go on. So I went on this retreat, and his dad was the pastor of the youth group, and so he was kind of sharing the plan of salvation with me, or with the group, and I knew I wanted it. Like, I knew I'd yearn for it all my life, just yearn for God, and but it was scary to take that step, that step of giving my entire life. So I wrestled with it then, and just came home that night and just was like, yes, Jesus, I want you in my heart, and I believe that you died for all my sins. But I knew I had held back. And I remember, like, fast forward maybe, I don't know, 12, 15 years later, kind of dealt with that wrestling even then. Kind of asked the Lord to go back to that place. And it was like, once I addressed the fear, it was kind of like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And yet I'd wrestled with it for so long. And then presently, probably, 4 years ago, I think this is kind of the piece that you were kind of referring to a little bit, was just my transformation. And so, it was about 11, 12 years ago, Pete was told that his job was going to be ending, and that he had the offer to either take a severance or to move to Houston. So we chose to go to Houston, but we had prayed really literally since March until we'd have to go, which would have been August. Lord, is there a job here in Denver? And nothing. I mean, like, jobs were just scarce. And so we went to Houston, and on day 10, Pete came to me and he said, if I told you to pack your bags, we're going back to Denver, what would you say? And I said, they're packed, when are you leaving? And at that very moment, I knew that I'd stepped over a huge line, because I should have checked with the Lord and see what he thought about that, because who knows the plans and purposes he had for us in Houston, because he didn't provide the job in Denver. It's interesting to talk with Pete. He has a whole different take on it. He said going to Denver was never God's will, and he didn't believe God's will was such that if you did this, you're wrong if you go here. He felt like God gives you choices. So, but I knew in my heart, I guess, that I had stepped over a pretty big line by not checking with God first to make sure he was okay with it. And I was pretty much mature in my faith at that point, that I knew what I was doing. It's kind of like, a teenager that knows better, and yet still choosing to do something he knows he shouldn't do.
Was it just kind of a restless, sometimes people call that a check, or just just a sense in your spirit?
Yeah, I just knew I guess I was wanting to go back to Denver for selfish reasons. My best friend was there, which, that's part of been my journey too in the last 4 or 5 years. God just showing me that he wants to be my all in all, that it's him that I need to check in with. That's him that I need to get the approval on, and the making decisions to see if he's okay with it, rather than being dependent on man. So I don't know if you want me to go more into my story on that.
Yeah, so you had moved to Houston, and then you were ready to come back to Denver, and you said, okay, let's go. And then you felt like, okay, I didn't really check with the Lord.
And I didn't do anything about it. I just went. We just came back.
Yeah. So how did you feel during that time?
I think for me personally, I just knew there was not so much a wrestling as there was a, not peace, whatever that looks like or feels like. You just know you're not doing the right thing, you're not. And so kind of continued on with life. I think I ignored whatever was going on, didn't really want to deal with it, didn't want to go there, until one day God just, I think I had the courage to ask him, because there had been a lull maybe of 3-4 years at this point from moving from Houston to back to Denver. And there's just a lot of, I saw it mostly in relationally, that things weren't good relationally with other people. Maybe in my knee-jerk reactions to people, maybe I would have had self-control before, and now I'm like, no, I'm just going to do whatever I want. And the way I looked at it was that if I could step over that line of not checking in with the Lord on a decision pretty significantly where I'm going to live, all the other lines were easy to step over, as far as treating people a certain way or whatever.
Sure.
So one day I just asked the Lord when I just noticed that, gosh, who am I? What's going on here? And I just said, Lord, when did this all begin? And he just spoke very clearly back in my spirit, and he just had one word, and he said, Houston. And I knew immediately.
Wow.
And I just said, Lord, I'm really sorry. You're right. I didn't check in with you, and I disobeyed you, and will you forgive me? It was just one of those. And I just kind of asked him, is there anything else? And that was just pretty much clearly kind of, and right around that time I was also just wanting, I don't know, I'd heard this people say, oh, you don't want to go there, just in life,
Sure.
Oh no, you don't want to go there. Oh, I'm not going there. You just hear these people make comments like that.
Right.
And it was at the time in my walk where I just was like, Lord, I'm, kind of courageously, I want to go there. I don't know where there is, but I want to go there. And I think by him revealing my heart to me, my behavioral stuff, he was allowing me to see that that's where he was. He was in my heart. And so, so I was in a study at the time in Isaiah, and got to Isaiah 43 and this verse that said, you are precious and you are honored and I love you. And right around that time, our first granddaughter was born, and I would be over at their apartment all the time holding her while she slept. And I just love her so much. And I'm looking down at her and I'm thinking, there's nothing she's doing for me to love her. Right? She's behaving well. It's not like she's performing well. I just love her. And it was at that moment God just showed me how much he loved me, that I didn't have to do anything. Didn't have to perform a certain way. He just loved me. And he said, you're precious, you're honored, and I love you. And it was just a very tender moment. So that was kind of like in spring of like 4 years ago. And then it was maybe June of that year that I decided to go get some counseling to find out. I always like to get to the why. Why did I act that way? And what was going on? And just to kind of get some clarification. And one of the first things my counselor said to me is, Sue, I want you to go home. I mean, there had been lots of discussions. It wasn't just the first time. She goes, I want you to go home and I want you to take a piece of paper and I want you to fold it so that you have like 8 different sections. And I began folding my paper. And I didn't even get done folding it. Maybe I didn't even get done. Maybe I unfolded it and realized what she was after. Because she said, I want you to write down the roles that you play. So put a different role in each section. And then what it looks like. And as I unfolded the paper, I realized I don't have roles. There's just one role. And that is that I am daughter of the King. I'm a believer in Christ, period. And if I live out of that place, really everything else falls in. Then I will be the mother-in-law that God wants me to be. He'll have me be the mom that I'm supposed to be, and the grandmother, and the sister, and the friend, you name it. I don't have many roles, I just have one. And that was just, for me, that was my identity, and it just really was so clear to me. So that was kind of like probably over the summer, and then in September, I've been in counseling now 4 months, still feeling like this wrestling kind of going on inside of me, just an unsettledness. So I'm sitting in my family room having my, time with the Lord, with my Bible and my journal, and I just said, Lord, what is it that Jana sees and probably everybody else sees that I'm just not seeing? What are my blinders, whatever. And he just showed me that I was holding on to him with one hand and holding on to Pete with another hand. So I guess maybe a divided heart. And he showed me that, and I thought, I know what I need to do. And I've already walked this road of rebellion prior, this whole Houston thing. So I know I don't want to go and do that again. And so I know I had a choice here. Sitting there with the choice, I can let go of Pete, or I can continue walking this road as the Lord showed it to me. And so right at that moment, I just said, I'm letting go. And I literally let go of Pete. And immediately freedom just rushed through my heart. There was stillness in the room. I mean, I felt like, where did I go? It was just like this, the air conditioner or heat wasn't running, the cat wasn't bugging me to be petted, just stillness. And immediately out of my lips came, Jesus, you are my Lord and Savior.
Wow.
So I know I'd been walking in faith in the Lord, but I don't know if this was just a lordship, like going back to the campfire when the youth leader asked me to give my whole life to the Lord and I held back. It's like almost like, I don't know if it's fear that holds, because I think I still experience that, where you have to surrender, because surrender is going to be my walk for the rest of my life.
Right.
Hopefully everybody's, not just mine, but I think that is the way of walking, is that it's a series of surrender to the Lord as He reveals things. And
I find that fascinating. So I grew up in a church and a tradition where it was like, we got to make your big decision, right? Which is like the camp thing, or what you did every year.
Right, exactly.
And, it's like this big thing. And then what I'm learning as I get older is that, no, it's really, that's important. That's a moment that you need to have. But there's more, it's this constant process of letting go of all this other stuff, right, that you're holding on to, just like you're talking about, or choosing the Lord over these other things.
To be a follower of Christ, He says you've got to lose your life to find it. And sometimes, I hate to say most often, it's like hitting a brick over my head, like, when are you going to get it?
Yeah.
But I think I'm not supposed to get it, because where would Jesus come in? Where would He be needed if I got it, if I figured it out?
Oh, yeah.
He wants to be constantly sought after. And so,
Right, developing that as a pattern of your heart. I think that's very powerful. That's really good.
Yeah, it was just really powerful. And so from there, I sat there after that, and I said, okay, Lord, well, what about my marriage? I'm not going to go and divorce Pete. Because I had to let go of him, right?
Yeah, what does that mean?
What does that mean, right? And he immediately just, again, spoke back in my spirit, and he just said, Christ-centered marriage. So instead of Pete and I looking eye to eye with each other, two sets of eyes looking at each other, it's more locking arms, and our eyes are on Christ, not on each other. And so we both look to Christ to live our lives and live out of that place, rather than sucking life out of each other.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's a process. For probably a good year or two or more, I'm like, what does that mean? What are we gonna, because, and so I think that's a continuing, we're learning, walking,
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask about you when the Lord speaks to you. What is that like? Like, you described it as kind of speaking into your spirit.
I don't know. I can't explain it. I just know, and it's not an audible voice, but I hear it in my mind. I don't know, or I say my heart, but I just hear Him, and I know it's Him because it's like, first of all, it's truth. It's not, that condemning voice that can sometimes come into my heart, or, and it's usually new. It's not something like I could come up with, or I've thought about. It's something that, wish I could describe it better to you.
Oh, I think that's great, though, because I think a lot of people have this experience, and we don't really talk about it a lot because you can't really quantify it. It's sort of subjective.
Yeah.
And yet, like you said, it's objective. It's outside of us. It comes in. I've had some of those experiences too, where you go, that wasn't me. It was God. I can't explain it any other way.
It's God with us, because He says He dwells in our hearts.
Right.
I think in this whole experience, He showed me that He has sealed my heart, which means, I used to think it was like a seal, like a seal, like a stamp of approval thing. But I've, in more recent years, figured out, no, it's a seal like you would put, I don't know, around something, and nothing is going to penetrate it.
Yeah.
So, only Jesus is in that place. And He's there to stay. He's made up residence. He's not leaving. And He says in His word, He never leaves us nor forsakes us. And I used to think His presence comes and it goes, and it comes and it goes. But He's always there. It's just that I've turned my back on Him and need to turn back to Him to allow, inviting Him into the present, so His presence, is known. So,
who've been some of your mentors?
Well, a long time ago was a woman by the name of Wilma Davis. She was the missionaries I told you about. She mentored me through my high school years. Some through group mentoring and some just one-on-one because I lived two houses down. So I would constantly go down to her house and hang out with her. And then she'd have what was called a 515 club, and it was me and about 3 or 4 other teenage girls. And I think that's why I have such passion to mentor teenage girls or young adults. Just that, I mean, I know we're told in Titus to the younger women, the older women are teach the younger women, but I think that's where I get a lot of passion myself when I'm watching them connect the dots in their spiritual walk, or you're just kind of sharing with each other and you're sharpening each other's iron sharpening iron. So Wilma Davis was my first mentor who led me to, her husband was the one that led me to the Lord. And then I would say I was in Bible study fellowship, and I would say probably teaching leaders were my mentors.
Yeah.
Not necessarily one-on-one, but definitely in teaching me the Word of God. And then Larry Pombianco is another mentor.
Oh yeah, I know Larry.
Larry was, it's just neat. I recently realized what I'm doing with the young adults is exactly what he and I have done, but we didn't call it mentoring. I would just call him one day, hey, want to meet for lunch? And we'd meet at Panera and just talk life, and spiritual stuff. And I realized we did that for several years. I used to serve in the youth ministry at South, and so he was the youth leader at the time.
Right.
So, yeah. So I'd say Larry. And most recently, I don't know that I really have a mentor right now. I've been praying for that, just like realizing that someone has to be pouring into you, and you pouring into someone else. Like, you're not finished, so therefore someone spiritually mature needs to be pouring into you. So I'm praying about that.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
What books have impacted you? Are there any? I didn't prepare you for this question.
No, that's good. No, there's been some, and I've even counseled with this one woman. The Last Addiction was one of them. I read her book by Sharon Hirsch. She's a counselor here in Greenwood Village. Counseled with her just the last couple of years, but I read her book first. And it was just incredible. When I read her book, I thought, that's my story in a book. So I love it how God knows I would love to write a book, but He's already put it in a book form. Her book by Sharon. And then the Bible study I'm doing right now, Developing a Discerning Heart. It's a study, but I'd also wanted to, I would love to pass my experience on to other people, but how do I put that into words? And I feel like this Developing a Discerning Heart is my experience in words. Cool. So it's cool. But favorite books, I have a book called The Surrendered Life? No, I'm sorry. It's called The Calvary Road. It's like this 99-page book, less than 100 pages, written back in 1953. And I've read several times because it really is the walk of the surrendered life. It's probably why I wanted to call it that.
Yeah.
Just about our life with Christ and emptying our cup, but also offering our dirty cup for Jesus to clean, and then offering our cup for Him to fill. So it's just
awesome. That's good.
Those are books that are popping off the top of my.
Sure. Well, they definitely go with some of the themes that I'm seeing through your story, right?
Yeah.
With surrender. And,
yeah.
That's
totally.
great.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So I want to go back just a little bit because we kind of skipped from when you became a Christian to your Houston experience.
Yeah.
What was the time in between there like, and how you described it a little bit? You said you were kind of holding back. How did that
play itself out?
Yeah.
So I think holding back. I think again, when I was sharing this testimony about the Lord showing me I was holding on to Pete and holding on to him, and I was sharing that with a group of women. It's interesting. He also showed me while I was giving the talk.
Wow.
I had been going back to these times in my life, like one when I became a Christian, one when I was pregnant and having to decide to get married. It was never a decision to abort the baby, but there was that temptation. But it was like interesting that I was brought back to these significant places. And when I was giving the talk, to these women, I realized Jesus was showing me, yeah, I forgave you then.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I forgave you for that. So recognizing the grace of God, and I think that His blood doesn't cover some of our sin.
Yeah.
His blood covers all of our sin, and it was completed 2,000 years ago. So there's nothing we could do about it.
Right.
So therefore, there's nothing that was left off. Like, it was on the cross even before we were born.
Right, before we did any of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is
and
why...
even if we find it horrifying,
Right.
the decision we made or this line we crossed, we don't get to decide if it's forgiven or not.
Yeah.
And
yeah, Tim Keller has this great quote, you probably read it, where he says, sin is... How does he say that? I forget. I'll have to find it. But it's something like sin is more horrible than you think, and more overcomable than you think, or something like that, right? Like, in the sense is that it's actually a much deeper part of us than we are even aware, but that God is still able to take care of that, and it's still forgiven and taken care of.
Right. So I would say from age 14, after I became a believer, like I told you, I went to the 515 club, so I was growing. Then worked full-time for a year, took a year off from college, and then met Pete, and we dated for 2 years. And there was that line that we crossed, of having sex, and then me getting pregnant, and then him needing to finish college for another year. What do we do? And that was just a whole watching God work even through that, because we were tempted, we were both tempted to abort, but God showed up both times, like, no. Like, and He had even been preparing me months prior to even me knowing I was going to get pregnant. Like, with a sister that said to me, if you ever get pregnant, don't abort. That's a baby inside of you. Like, wow. And then to the point where then I found out I was pregnant and having to go home and tell mom and dad, and their reaction. Dad looking at him with such disappointment. My mom just kind of, telling us that we didn't screw anybody's lives up but our own, but that became that driving force for our marriage. So we're going to keep fighting. We're not going to ever let us, to know, when we did get married, to saying we'll never get divorced. That's a commitment we make to each other. But so that was like age 20, 21. Had Jason. Pete finished college, and then shortly after I got into Bible study fellowship, where I feel like that is where I grew and got grounded in God's word, kept, taking those steps of faith where you just tip your toe into, okay, I'm going to have faith here, I'm going to have faith here, and just watching God. But I realized when I moved here to Colorado 16 years ago that up until that time, I could trust for you to have an answer of prayer answered. Like, I'd pray for you about something, and I'd have such strong faith, as to move mountains. But then for me personally, it was harder. And so I realized even early on when we moved here to Colorado that God was going to take me on a journey of trusting Him. And I really do believe that 4 or 5 years ago when I asked God, what happened? Where did this all begin? And He showed me Houston. That was kind of substantial. I really believe that's a pivotal place in my walk, is to just letting Him show me, trusting Him enough that He was good and He was out for my good. And so, so this whole faith walk, it's an ongoing and more struggle than I want to admit, but
See, I think that's so powerful to say, though. It's so important because there's this idea, and this is, again, maybe what I grew up with, but it's like, if you come to Jesus, then everything will be okay. And that's how we normally tell our testimonies.
Right.
And we say, but now I'm great, Well, no, if you read the Bible, and you read Paul's testimony after he became a believer, it was horrible. He was bitten by snakes and beaten up and all these things that we would look at and go, that's not what I signed up for, God, sorry. What's going on here? And because I thought that this was all going to be good now.
Right.
And
that's the lie, right? The lie the enemy wants you to swallow, so that, take our eyes off the Lord to trust Him for our life, to do it.
He doesn't necessarily change the world the way that the world is bad and broken.
Darn it.
But He changes us.
Right?
Yeah,
I've heard that. Yep, for sure. And He does, as we trust Him. But realizing though that he's much more powerful. Like he says, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Well, who that's in the world, it's not only man, but it's also Satan. He's in the world. So it's, it's people, it's Satan. God is greater than that. God is greater than anything that we can face. But it's when we believe the lie that, oh, you don't need God. No, you can do it. You need to pull your bootstraps up, and you need to take care of it. That takes our focus off the Lord, which the enemy loves. And then we try to do it ourselves, and we fall on our face, and then we get back up, and we go back to the Lord, and it's that ongoing relapses that I talk about. That was one of the things the counselor asked me. She said, if you had a rescue kit, what would be inside of it? My first thought was, do I need a rescue kit? And oh yes, I do, because what was cool about her asking it when she did was that as God took me through not only my transformation, but future, what I call relapses, is when I take my eyes off the Lord and I try to do it in my own strength, that what he shows me in those times. So I began writing notes. I'm a note taker, so I'll take any scrap of piece of paper when he's showing me things, and I'll write it down. And I realized before long, I don't know, a year and a half, that I had a stack of just things he had been showing me. So I bring this, my old spiral notebook, and I mean, it's literally got either things taped in it, but it's also got verses, and just at every top of the page, I write one roll to remind myself who I am.
Yeah.
Who I am. I belong to Christ only, and that I'm responsible to him, and I follow after him.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I love that.
It's cool. I mean, things that he's taught me, but one of them is just run fast back to Jesus as soon as you know you've taken your eyes off of him, and come back to him. It's there you'll have peace and life and, clarity and you name it, so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share, or anything that God's doing with you now that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I was writing, actually I wrote some of that, what presently, and that, the presently is just the whole, the mentoring, that kind of thing, and just realizing that, I think sometimes I can minimize that, I feel like I'm not quote unquote doing enough. There's that doing again. But as long as we're doing what the Lord wants us to do, it's enough. And so, I'll look and see, because I did write some notes as my kind of what's presently going on of, just I'm presently finishing just developing a discerning heart. I'm going to go get some training on it so that I can then maybe take some young women kind of through it to show. It's kind of a study kind of all about our hearts. And I thought if I ever wrote a book, it would be called The Journey of the Heart, because I felt like my whole time going through the counseling and being kind of set free is, it really was the journey of the heart. And I remember even God just showing me that in this process that the Holy of Holies is my heart. And I remember that day when he showed that to me. I always thought that was somewhere off in his kingdom somewhere, and when we go to pray that we're meeting him in that place, but really we're meeting him in our heart in that place. And I remember Dan Elliott preaching on the tabernacle, and when he got to the Holy of Holies, and it was like, I don't know if you've had this experience with your kids, their teachers either telling you this or Jody telling you this, when they're reading a book at a young age, 4 or 5 years old, 6, all of a sudden the words they're reading, they actually understand what they're reading, it's a light bulb goes off. And for me, what the light bulb went off is that the Holy of Holies is in my heart.
Wow.
That precious place that God wants to meet with me is actually in my physical body.
Yeah.
And it's a place he meets me. And it was just so cool for him to reveal that to me. And that he was showing me kind of back, going to that whole Houston, the post experience of Houston, showing me my behavior was just allowing me to see where my heart actually was, where it existed. It wasn't somewhere in heaven, it's right here in my physical body, and it's where he dwells permanently.
Right.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Wow, that's great. Well, thank you so much for just sharing with me. That was fun. It's I love to hear what God's doing in your
really
life.
Cool.
Just the ways that He's kind of brought you through your whole life with this sort of theme. It's just beautiful. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This was awesome.
All right. Well, there's just a couple things that I wanted to mention to you here at the close of this show. First of all, Sue, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate that. And I know that you feel called to sharing your story. And it really is a privilege to have had you on halfway there. One thing I want you guys to know is that there you notice the audio quality was a little echoey. And just so you know, I'm aware of it. There's a lot that I'm learning about podcasting. I did a few interviews in some small rooms, and that turns out can be kind of echoey. So there's still a ton of things to learn, and the stories that I'm going to share with you over the next few weeks, this one and maybe the next 3 or 4, have not quite as great of audio quality as I wished I had, but there's going to be tons that you'll still be able to learn. Okay, so there's that. I also wanted to just clarify, because I really messed up the quote from Tim Keller when I was talking to Sue, and here's the quote. Tim Keller says, "The gospel is this: we are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe. Yet at the same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope." Tim Keller says that in his book, The Meaning of Marriage. If you want to pick that up, go out to my website, ericnevins.com. You should see Sue's page there, and for the show notes for this particular episode. And there's a link to get Tim Keller's book, The Meaning of Marriage. That is a great book, and it's there's some great quotes in there, and yeah, I believe it'll help you. You can also get the books that Sue mentioned. They're all right there for you, okay? While you're at the website, if you wouldn't mind, you can just, if you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, please do. It helps a lot, and if you leave a review, it really does let everybody know that this is a show worth listening to and gets the show in front of more people. And I really have a vision. I just want to reach as many people as I possibly can with some of these amazing experiences and stories that I'm sharing with you. And I would love to have your help in doing that, if you wouldn't mind. You can just go to ericnevins.com. There's a big subscribe button there. You can click it there, and then while you're there in iTunes, you can leave a review. Hey, thanks a lot for doing that in advance. Until I catch you next week, keep the faith, okay?